Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Chow from the Essential Services Commission. I think I know most of the people here, but in case you do not know me, so thank you for participating in this forum today. We are really glad about the cross-section of views and perspectives that have been presented throughout the day. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Katie Jones and Iain Walker. I don't think I go into their credentials, and you know that they are highly experienced and they are leaders in the field in community and deliberative engagement. But I'll introduce them shortly to take over the session. But just before I do that, I just wanted to say a few words why we got into this space. We commissioned KJA and newDemocracy Foundation to do a paper. So their presentation in a few minutes is based on a draft paper that they prepared up. And is basically trying to address two questions. What exactly is deliberative engagement? We heard of the term a lot in the morning, and we really want to demystify that. We really want to come down to the basics. What are the underlying principles? And how are some of those, when they're put into practice, actually facilitate the achievement of the good community outcomes that we have in mind? So that's the first question. The second question stems from a lot of feedback we have from particularly the smaller councils. How can they be made to apply to smaller councils? So most of them, including ourselves, really think that it's, horses for courses. You really do not need a citizen jury for every situation, and we don't expect you to, and we don't encourage you to. And the thing to remember too is that at the Commission, we do not affirm or endorse any technique or tool. We are really sort of facilitating, two things. The discussion that talk about what good practices can be that lead to the achievement of the kind of outcomes that you want in good community engagement. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask Katie and Iain to sort of work through with you, and following this session, we also invite you to provide feedback to the draft paper. So we hope to finalize it, to put it as an additional resource on our website. So I think we're going to have some interesting discussion. I'll hand it over to Katie and Iain. Thank you.
Now, I've been working with Andrew and his team for the past 2 years, and what we did was that we developed the 4 principles that you'd all be aware of in terms of what our expectations were in terms of engagement and engagement outcomes. Together, we pulled together and we tested those principles with a group of local professionals and people from IAP2, various council people, consultancies, etc. And then what we also did is that we established an engagement technical working group. And you've heard me refer to that a couple of times today, and there are people here who represent that group. And what that group did was that it looked at what the learnings were from each of the assessments and from what they were hearing about from local government, etc. And then they helped the Essential Services Commission write the guidance material that is on the website, and also provided input to this conference and to the way we assessed the engagement component of council's applications. And what kept coming up time and time again was because, and it's partly because, and again, as I said before, I have to declare an interest as I'm on the board of newDemocracy, but I wasn't working in that capacity with the Essential Services Commission. And to Ian's great credit, the whole citizens jury piece in Victoria has been incredibly successful. With the Infrastructure Victoria, with Geelong. So people are talking about it, and we kept getting comments saying, well, you know, do we need to have a citizens' jury to pass some test with the Essential Services Commission? And that's the furthest thing from the truth. The absolute truth is it's about the outcome of the engagement. So that being said, and one of the reasons why I'm a committed New Democracy person is not because of citizens' juries, but because of the underlying principles associated with citizens' juries. And there are many ways of disseminating or of people learning about those principles. And that was one of the reasons why earlier on in the day I asked the head of LGV, what about the community? What are we doing to actually help the community to become more receptive and more understanding of some of these difficult principles? And so there's a set of principles associated with citizens' juries which involve, one, critical thinking, and there's a community base, but they also apply to council officers and councillors as well. And the second one is the ability to deliberate. So what people really need to do when they're thinking about complex issues is that they need to be able to think critically. And there's a really lovely little animation on the New Democracy website about critical thinking, which Keith was involved in making. And I urge all of you to have a look at that, because it's as simple as having people understand what everybody's opinion is, not just their own, and to be able to think critically about that. Then the second element, which we urge you to consider, or the second principle, is around deliberation and how we can encourage people to deliberate. And that's really what that document in front of you is about now. It's about saying there are principles which you can embed into your thinking. So and I don't want to steal your thunder, but To Wong, is really, I know that she goes out, like the CEO goes and does all her own consultation, but some critical, like giving her the skills to be able to teach critical thinking and deliberation would be an ideal way for her to make it a little bit easier. So that's really why we wanted to have this session and why we've written the document that we have. And we really do welcome your comments. You know, and it's very much an overview, but it's something that we wanted people to actually engage with. So really what I'd like to hear from, and this is going to be question and answer, Iain, because you have a tendency to, talk. Yeah?
I've been quiet so far.
You have, and we love your talk, but, I will interrupt from time to time. So, Iain, tell me about how you think deliberation can be applied in a small, local, rural context.
Sure. The starting point for this is, because people often grasp at what is deliberation. It's become a catchy buzzword that's been thrown out. And the aspiration is simply, let's stop asking people what they think when they haven't had time to think. That's all it really is. I don't want your next 5 seconds of opinion. I want to slow that down. Now, what does that mean in a small council? And a lot of people I've spoken to have come from population bases and rate bases today of, 7,000, 10,000 people. Yes, we're a victim of a lot of the projects that we've run have been at a several $100,000 budget and above. But the principles are the same. And if I want to step really briefly through those 5 really big principles that are actually in this book, it says it's less about the raw financial investment and just about a way of thinking. And really central to this is, can people read and consider a little information? Are they just firing at you from the top of their head, or can we get them to consider just a handful of sources? And once people start to read and engage and actually share and understand your problem, their response to you will change, and the quality of the input changes as well. I think we see around the country a lot of people hearing, fix my roads. Great. Let's show people what a road costs. Let's include the views of resident groups or commercial groups and have a range of sources there that say this is council's view, this is councillor's view, and a range of sources of information. There was a comment from Councillor Fife right at the beginning of the day, and it was echoed by a couple of people, which is what you've really got to spend is time. I know that has a cost as well, but fundamentally what we're asking people to do is ask different questions of your community. Stop asking them to react and start asking them, what information do you want council to consider? What would you like to hear? Who are the sources that you trust? And when you start to include that information in an engagement, you do start to get a very different shape of responses. So that's information. And the second really big test is, am I hearing from a representative group in the community or the people who are the noisiest in my community? And I know it seems like this is a festival of the obvious a little bit, but there's a tendency to say, I think there was a wonderful point on surveys today where 86% of people agreed with something because 7 people responded. And there's a chance just to step back and say, how do I hear from a representative sample? And it's possible. People want to be engaged, but the flip side for us and our third principle is one of authority. Authority costs nothing. It's simply a matter of telling people what you'll do with their decision and when you'll do it. Throughout, I've been doing this for 7 years, and as a research foundation, we look at the mechanics of does this work and why does it break and where it works well. And we've asked people, why do you accept our invitations, our random, out of the blue invitations to participate? And there are 3 big answers that stand out right at the top. One is, you put the authority in bold on the front of that invitation to participate. You will get a direct answer from the Premier in person within 30 days. That could be the Mayor, that could be the Council Chief Executive, but it's a very clear answer in writing, it's a very clear parameter in terms of authority that makes a person go, gee, that's worth my time. Secondly, what we do has a beginning and an end. People don't want to get into things that feel like they're bottomless. They'll give you the time if you say, I need this Saturday, this Wednesday night, this Saturday morning, and then it's ended, and you'll get that response. Most surprisingly but positively, the number one response, it was done across 3 projects of why people accepted these invitations to participate. It came to someone like me, so I figured it went to other normal people, not people who go to council meetings. The nature of the way we've engaged in the past has made people reluctant to go in and hear, I think we heard in the last session, the grievances of 18 years ago rehashed in that war again. People need a new promise that this is actually new and different to bring them out. Our response rates to random invitations vary between the lowest we've experienced is 2.5%. The peak is 38%. That is a random sample of people, completely blind, asked a public policy question. People want to be involved. We can rely on 8% response rates, which is a very large number for those who are getting an invitation with absolutely no name and details on it. So that's where I look at, hopefully what we're asking you to do, it's not about cost. It's not about replicating an expensive model. It's saying, can I just get people to slow down and think? Consider a range of sources, discuss it among a diverse group of people who aren't just like themselves, and start to tell council, hey, this is what we can agree on. We understand some costs and trade-offs, and this is an informed recommendation, not just a spray off the top of our heads.
So one of the key things is what often happens, as you just referred to, someone bringing up 18 years of angst, is that people come to consultations. They often come to consultations because they've got an existing point of view, and that's how you get. And it has been referred to a number of times today how difficult it is to stand in front of people in a local community hall when they've all got a pre-existing point of view. So how do we address that?
One of the fundamental ways to address it is we remove the target. There's a lot of citizens who are maybe a little bit aggrieved and they just like taking pot shots at councillors and council staff. It's easy, there's no consequences, you get to go home feeling right. And one of the things we like to do is change that dynamic by saying to any active group, any active interest, would you like the chance to make your case to a representative group of citizens? It can just be 24, 28, 32 people. What happens? They love the opportunity because everybody thinks they have God on their side. Oh, if I finally get that hearing, this will go my way. But you ask them to accept, if it doesn't go your way, you can see it's not staged against you, can't you? And I just want to give a very concise example of that from a project we did 6 or 7 years ago now, where one of the submissions came from a group of netballers. And the mayor, he was sweating and he said, everyone in elected office is scared of netballers. Because if you have a 6 to 15-year-old daughter, she's going there every single Saturday, and if you're doing something to annoy them, they're going to make your re-election prospects pretty tough. And instead of the netballers continually approaching council and councillors of all persuasions saying that's a very interesting proposal that we will review, and they're never going to verbally say no to them, the netballers got the chance to make their case to a mixed group of people. And it's not to mandate a model, it's simply to say, can we combine in some format active interests who have one single point of view with a representative group of people and just engage them in conversation and then say to council, now would you like to hear the common ground that those two groups could find?
So when we talk about representative group of people, we're actually talking about randomly selected group of people. And the reason why we say representative is because they need to be representative of different sectors in the community. And so it's not about, in my view, it's not about actually setting up some kind of a jury system. It's actually about going to the electoral roll and randomly selecting, 50 people or however many, and just inviting them to come in and have, a cup of tea. Yeah. And it's the same. It's the same amount of effort, but with a different outcome.
Yeah, the thing I loved about the Toowong is Juliana still here? That model was it was actually close to what we ask people to do is pose people a question, don't sell them an answer, and that's what we saw happening there. So if I was in a very distributed area with huge distances and people not willing to come together, are people familiar with kitchen table discussion kits? Just 12, 16 pages. It might have a council view and 3 active groups around the community, their view on something that council wanted a response to. I'd ask people to come along for maybe a Saturday breakfast at a cafe. Doesn't even have to be council staff there. What are we doing? We're getting a group to mix. One of the cheapest forms of random selection is pick the first lotto ball comes out next Monday. No one thinks we could fix that, right? If I could fix lotto numbers, I would not be here. But if you say whatever the first 2-digit lotto ball is, if that's in your mobile phone number, you're picked. Well, you can put that in the local paper. It is a zero-cost form of recruitment. And we can actually reach out to people and say, anyone who did that just got free breakfast at a cafe, come along and discuss my 16-page discussion kit. Now, we know people want to have a say in their local community. That's a very simple thing you can go along to. It can be distributed on a huge area, and you might have 8 to 10 little groups of just 8 or 10 people come together. But we're getting them to think rather than react. We're getting a cross-section, not just those with a direct interest. And it's a chance to have that substantive conversation which lets you as council say, actually, we are getting a considered view back from a community, not just the consultation as usual.
Does anyone have any questions of Iain at this moment? Because there was quite a bit of discussion up on the poll everywhere around the seeming abdication of or takeover of responsibility. If you start doing engagement and you give that engagement a certain level of authority, isn't that undermining the democratic process? And this is something we hear a lot, and I know you've got a great answer to it.
Really? Would you like to tell me what great answer you particularly think I'm leading into? No, look, generally councillors...
This is all Dorothy Dix's, by the way.
Councillors are often subject to... It's a thankless job in a lot of ways. And they're subject to people saying, you're doing a terrible job, I'd do it better, I'd like to point my finger. So if you're going to complain about the system, you shouldn't complain about chances to share the decision and do it a little bit differently. You can't be on both horses for that one. If people are already making widely trusted decisions and there's no angst, well, that's great. You're in a very happy situation. For those that aren't, and I'm particularly mindful, I've forgotten which council it was, but they started down the 4.5%, 8.5% rate rise document,
yep.
And the councillor said, we never want to discuss that again. That really sounds like a good scenario where, yes, you've been elected, and it's not backing off from something, it's a rational response. If people are going to throw rocks at you endlessly, I too would step back. All we're suggesting is there's a complementary role. Wasn't it? What's great for public trust is a group of people not up for re-election, standing next to people in elected office, standing next to council staff saying, hey, I've actually read this, and we spoke to a few people, this is fair enough. That's That's essentially what the product of a good engagement and a good community conversation is. We would view, if you wanted to do a metric of what is success, do you end up with a pool of citizens who've gone deep enough that they'll stand next to you and share the decision? I don't care what format you run to get there, but for me, they're the decisions I trust. There was a comment there that, yes, don't we have elected officials to make these decisions? I want to very gently suggest that there can be a slight impairment on the decisions anyone is willing to take when you then have to face re-election. Because you do get campaigned against, you do get attacked, and that's the great joy of another group standing alongside, is they do act as a shock absorber. And they do it because they deliver something that is trusted. I'm getting...
Oh.
In general terms, yes. The ideal scenario, because the really good two-way exchange is you want councillors to see the citizens discussing it substantively. It's the greatest point of surprise you get in any deliberative format is, I've never walked into a room where citizens have read so much. It's quite a surprise.
And the other thing, remember at Canada Bay, and they couldn't believe that citizens were saying, you know, these council officers work really hard.
Yeah. We've run one project, it was at Penrith. We tend to work in areas which are, Penrith in Sydney is obviously Western Sydney heartland, is quite resonant for those in elected office. It's the only jury that's ever come back with, we are entirely happy with the status quo. And we have a piece of vision of he's an egg farmer, and people with lots of chickens do not have good relationships with councils because chickens produce a great deal of shit. And this guy is a mid-50s bikie in leathers, and he stood up and said, I accepted this invitation. I'm trying to think of a PG way to do this now that I've started down this path. I accepted this invitation because I expected to find a giant pack of fools wasting my money. He said it more colourfully. What do I get out of coming to 6 meetings? 99.5% of what they spend is fair enough. So all I really get is, I don't hate paying my rates now. And my suggestion to you is that the council are actually disappointed because they wanted potentially larger projects to come out. And I said, no one will ever trust a single member of your staff or a single elected representative to say that. But Marin, on his chicken farm, everyone will trust. He has no self-interest in, there's nothing motivating him to say that. Why did he do it? Because he didn't get invited to a 1-hour town hall meeting and get pushed information. It's because he was with us for a longer period. And hence, it's not about the format in terms of cost and investment. It's just give him enough time to be part of the decision, even if it's going along in the local community with a kitchen table discussion kit, with mostly unaccompanied, but potentially with a councillor coming along. And the great dividend is the councillors see the people of thought, and the people see the councillor actually listening to them. Councillors tend to be quite happy to say, I normally attend community things where I get tarred and feathered. And this is just a conversation. And that difference being who insists on talking to you, and who talks to you by being invited, they are two radically different types of community conversation. And I think that's kind of the principle. I'm not saying don't listen to the angry people. I'm saying have a balance. Listen to both. And that's not a costly thing to do.
So we've got another question down there.
I just wanted to continue the question about councillors and how it works with deliberative processes. I've been asked by, I'm Jennifer from Hume, and I've been chairing a community committee. An expression of interest went out, and then on certain criteria, some were selected and the others are going to be invited to a broader workshop. It's to review an agricultural land use rebate on rates for looking after your land. Anyway, so we've had a few meetings so far, and councillors became interested, and so there was a conversation around is it best or not if councillors come to the actual meeting with this committee. And it is a sort of a deliberative process because they get a lot of technical expert information, they discuss it, they make requests for information. Anyway, so what they came up with was, because it's for another department that I'm chairing it, was that the councillors would be invited to come before the meeting. So the meeting goes for probably altogether with break and everything about 3 hours. And so they come before and talk to everyone, and then the mayor, welcomes everyone, says how valuable it is and thanks them for making their contribution, and then they go. But I'm just wondering if you have any views about, the best ways for councillors to be involved.
My personal view is that it's a discussion that needs to be had with the group. And yes, it's fantastic to have the councillors see citizens deliberating and the level that they can deliberate on. It's fantastic for them to see that, but permission for them to enter not to enter the conversation, but to observe that conversation, I think, needs to come from the group. Now, I know that, Iain, you've run that differently, haven't you, where you actually do have an audience?
Format matters. So grandstanding opportunities where two people sit up the front.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that, but they can observe.
Versus, you're right, I mean, Kathy's general principle is the citizens are in control. They don't want to be politicised at. They don't want the stump speech. So where we do like this small group speed dialogue format. It also avoids citizen groupthink in questions. If the first question is about roads, in a large format setting, every following question is about that. If you keep people in smaller groups, you get a different dynamic. The main thing, if you say what is deliberation to me, we're just aiming at equal share of voice and consideration of multiple sources. The councillors are good sources. They have perspectives, expertise, history of previous decisions, things coming in. Just keep it in balance. Is it the only activity you do versus allowing other sources, other people to come in as well? Just watch for it becoming too dominant.
I think the interesting thing that you were saying was they would be there to give advice, but they're not like participants, so that has to be clear. Their role has to be really clear.
Yeah. They can be experts and they can be observers.
Observers.
But not participants.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that.
Unless they're participants from the beginning and you've negotiated that with the group, would be my view.
Thank you.
Yes. Oh, you just want Freya to run.
Yeah, that's right. I love them. That's a great model of deliberative decision making, nimble, quick, easy, all the things that rural councils will need and anyone else. But I want to shift it a little bit to how this particular mechanism goes into a different process, which is the interaction of the bikie. It's great for him and for the council to see that, and that's awesome for that person and that resident to walk away with. Now, in terms of the decisions that we're looking at today and how councils can make decisions about their resourcing and their planning, what happens out of this type of particular mechanism as a result of that interaction? Does it underline the council spend, the package of information that they've put out? How does it actually translate from this interaction through to what we're talking about today, which is the framework of decision making in local government? And whether it's this mechanism or any other, these are all great things we can pull off the shelf, and it's a good one. But how does it translate to that mechanism and flow through to that decision making?
Really, it's actually about as Iain said, it's actually about asking the questions that you need to ask that have been talked about today about trade-offs, about if we what do you need? If we don't have this, what do we need? If we have this, then what can't we have? How do we make a sustainable budget? All of that is what you're doing your consultation on now. And what we're saying is that same consultation can be done in a more effective way by asking the questions in a different way and giving people time to think about the answers to those questions and giving them knowledge. So it has a direct influence on what we're talking about today.
What you can get from the community, there's no deliberative process, probably no engagement process that can turn people into experts like you have on staff. What you can get is clarity of intent and common ground. And I think where you can show that you've done that, you start to meaningfully meet the objectives as laid out. And the rough example I'd use is, in a criminal court, you can't turn someone into a ballistics expert, but an expert can talk to them. And when the person says, well, why did you convict Kathy? They'll say, well, we saw the two pictures of the bullets and the stripes down the side of them matched. When you can show that feedback of a citizen saying to you, I'm not an expert in roads, but I saw pictures of the different types of roads and I understood what they cost and I was willing to pay for them. That's the parallel where you can capture that informed, considered feedback where they've considered different pieces. From everything we read and what went in there, you're after that informed, considered feedback from a mixed group. And that's where I think you reach the target.
So I think we've got to wrap it up there, yeah? It comes to me now, but you can't go because you're going to help me do this, is to wrap up today's session. And we started the day by saying that we wanted you all to know more about what your council neighbours are up to and to have a better understanding of how to engage and to get the best results and how to meet community expectations, and understanding what is going on at the state level, some ideas about how to build on that and how to better support local government. So in response to that, I think the agenda sort of really certainly covered those key themes, but I think there were some real answers to all of those areas. We've heard quite a bit about trust and the need for trusted answers and trusted consultation and engagement. We've heard quite a bit about consultation, or the terminology consultation versus engagement versus communications. Are they separate? Are they the same? How does it work with finance, et cetera, et cetera? Resource constraints, we've heard a lot about that. What else, Iain?
I got a really loud, clear message early on there. People said, I almost don't know what I'm being asked to do, something's being dumped on me. And then I actually heard from council examples, and it was Evan, who I haven't got my agenda, I can't see, from Pyrenees, and Juliana, and I sat there and went, you're 80% of the way there already. You're actually closer than you think. It looks like an imposition because of terminology, but it's actually not. There's actually only a few tweak steps that you've got to take out to just slightly change your perspective. You're already taking out materials. Well, allow a couple of other sources to come in as well, and now people are considering a range of perspectives. You're already having detailed discussions with the community, so just pose them more genuine questions, more than just taking out a draft for a stamp. That's where I see the guidelines is, you're just going earlier and giving people more control, and a lot of what's being done is already workable. It already fits that deliberative model. It's a 10 to 20% change. It's not a wholesale drop. You need to copy the $400,000 that Infrastructure Victoria spent. And hopefully you've felt that change as we've gone on. And if you haven't, well, I'll have to stay around for a little while.